Shalom and welcome to another episode of TBN Israel, the podcast. I'm Mati Shoshani. I'm here in the studio with the one and only Yair Pinto.
Thanks, Mati. It's great to be here.
It's one of my favorite highlights of the week is getting to dive deep and talk at random with you about...
At random. We talk about, I think, very important stuff.
I agree.
Today we're going to dive into the head of a very terrible man, Yahya Sinwar.
Yeah.
He's the leader of Hamas, and I think he's one of the criminal masterminds of our generation now. And we're going to try and understand why is he doing what he's doing, what's his plans, what's his rationale, and how can we, by understanding him, how can we defeat him in this war?
Yeah, Yahya Sinwar is, he is a unique character, and this is exactly why we do this podcast. We do it because we want the opportunity to go deep. Someone like Yahya Sinwar, this master villain of our times, requires the right kind of treatment.
Yes.
And to really understand his motives, his MO, his modus operandi, why he does what he does, how he does it, we really need to take the time. And maybe we start with the dry facts. First of all, we'll describe who he is and what he leads. And then we'll go into his story and then how he has shaped the world we live in, and specifically the world we live in
Definitely in Israel.
Post October 7th.
And if you want to receive more videos like this one, please subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube or on other platforms on social media networks. We have this as a podcast, just voice. We have this as a video on YouTube. We have a channel on X, on other platforms, on Facebook. So please join us, subscribe, and share with anyone who seeks to know what really is happening in Israel and in the Middle East. And just to, give a preview to this. People keep saying, oh, this man is a psychopath. He's crazy. But he's a leader, and he has motives, and he has ideas, and he has strategies. So we need to understand how he's thinking in order to defeat his goals.
Yes. So let's start with the basic sort of the LinkedIn bio, as we say. Yahya Sinwar is the head of Hamas.
Yeah.
But he's not the only head of Hamas. He is head of one of the two branches of Hamas. Hamas has what they call a Zoa Medini to the
military and then
the military and the diplomatic, let's call it. And he leads, or the political, he leads the military branch of Hamas. And what it actually means is he actually leads the people led by Hamas.
He commands the army, basically, and
he commands
the army, the terrorists, and then through that also all the Gaza Strip, because he's on the ground, basically.
So between him and... so it splits two ways. Yahya Sinwar leads everything that happens under Hamas governance, which is within the Gaza Strip.
Inside the Gaza Strip borders, yes. And then Ismail Haniyeh leads everything that happens outside of the borders of the Gaza Strip. Now they are in Qatar, so Hamas has offices in Qatar, and they are basically organizing the connection with Iran, with Hezbollah, with other terrorists, and with the Arab supporting world and other people who just support Hamas in the world.
Yeah, but de facto, if you really look at the reality of it, the person who leads the everyday life of Hamas movement, especially as it pertains to the life of the people of Gaza, especially as it pertains to the relationship between Israel and Hamas, is Yahya Sinwar.
Yes.
And it has been him for quite some time. He is a unique character. He is both brutal and cunning. He is both personally violent. The man is known to have done horrific acts of violence.
Personally.
But he's also systematic. He's also one who is a relationship builder within his people. He's a wise politician. He is a very, very cunning and brilliant media person. This man has a well-executed worldview, a well-thought-out plan. He is deeply, deeply, deeply ideologically driven. He is a devout Muslim of a specific type of radical Islam. He's a very unique character.
By the way, this guy knows Hebrew. He spent some time in the Israeli prisons, but let's go down into it. So he was born in 1962 in Khan Yunis, in the Khan Yunis refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. By the way, Khan Yunis is like a terrible place. I've been there for 2 months in this war. It's a completely terror town. Everywhere you step, you have a terror tunnel, you have a position for RPG launchers, you have terror sniper positions. So You don't want to raise your kids in Khan Yunis. And that is where also other leaders of Hamas were born and raised. So that is kind of the symbol of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That's Khan Yunis. That's where he was born. That's where he was coming from.
That's where he shaped.
Yeah, well, that's where he shaped his ideology. And his family, after the independence war in 1948, was expelled from Ashkelon, which is an Israeli city, and then moved into the Gaza Strip.
Which is, I should say now an Israeli city. Back in 48,
it wasn't.
It was a mixed
Yes.
Arab and Jewish city under the British mandate, and then the Palestinians fled into the Gaza Strip, which was taken over by Egypt. And
at that time, yeah.
And this is sort of in 1989. So he's still a young man. He's already convicted for his first act of murder.
1989. So how old is he? He's like that means he's
27,
and he already is convicted for murder, and was charged with life term in prison, in Israeli prison.
4 life terms.
Yeah.
So I mean, by the time he's 27, he's already helped found the security force for the Hamas. He's educated and indoctrinated by the Hamas movement in the Islamic University of Gaza. And he goes on to murder 2 Israeli soldiers inside the Gaza Strip. Remember, in the 80s and 90s, all the way through 2005, Israel, from 67 through 2005, Israel controls on a military level, and back then also on a semi-civil level, most of the everyday life in the Gaza Strip.
We had Israeli cities inside the Gaza Strip as well. Yeah. So it was a mixed area.
Separated from the Palestinians, but yes.
Yes.
He murders soldiers, he murders Palestinian collaborators, which becomes a pattern for Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar...
To scare the Palestinian people not to help Israelis, basically.
Yes, I mean, he is feared by Israelis. He's more so feared by the Palestinians.
Yes.
He is nicknamed the Butcher of Khan Yunis. Yeah. He's a man who's murdered multiple people with his own hands for the suspect or the thought that they might be collaborators, rats or collaborators helping the Israelis. He is a ruthless individual. He is a violent individual. He's a person who instills fear in the hearts of his own people. And that's his background. This is how he rose to power.
Yeah.
He's imprisoned in 1989, and in his time in prison, he becomes a force to be reckoned with within Hamas.
And also within the prison.
Yes.
Like his fellow prisoners were afraid of him because he was ruthless. And this is according to the Israeli guards that they were in charge of him. He was ruthless towards the other Palestinian prisoners in the prison cell. And that's how he gained his control and rule over them. He was in prison for 22 years?
Yeah.
So it's a long time. And then he was released in 2011 when Israel exchanged one IDF soldier that was kidnapped into the Gaza Strip, Gilad Shalit.
Yeah, for more than 1,000 terrorists.
Yeah, for more than 1,000 terrorists, and he was one of these terrorists.
Yeah.
So and terrorists that had blood on their hands. Many of them attacked us in the 7th of October.
Yeah, and this story is so indicative of the relationship of Israel and the Palestinians. Yahya Sinwar, who is the man is bred, trained, and educated as a terrorist, and he spent his entire adult life learning and practicing and fine-tuning his ability as a leader within a death organization, the Hamas, and as a violent and ruthless individual within that organization.
Even in the prisons in Israel.
Even in the prisons in Israel. He's released as part of Israel's attempt to free one single soldier.
Yeah.
The Gilad Shalit agreement, and I'm saying this for people who are not familiar with the story, Gilad Shalit is was he a driver in a tank or a loader in a tank? No, a gunner.
No, I think a gunner.
A gunner.
A gunner.
So he was a gunner in a tank that his tank was overlooking the Gaza Strip. Terrorists pulled out of I believe it was a terror tunnel. They fired several rockets and then machine gun fire at the tank, killed his commander and another person in the tank.
And dragged him into the Gaza Strip.
And dragged him sort of like shell-shocked, out of the tank and into the Gaza Strip. Gilad Shalit was in captivity for quite a few years in the Gaza Strip, and we released well over 1,000 prisoners to get him back. Some of those people, top-notch terrorists within the Hamas organization. Yahya Sinwar is one of them.
Yes.
In Israeli prison, and this is important sort of as the background for this, the Israeli prison system, even for convicted terrorists such as Yahya Sinwar, provides them with what we would call a first world prison condition.
Yeah.
Education, paid for degrees, food, freedom of congregation. They're allowed to congregate within their own faction of terrorist organization. They're allowed to congregate within their own religious practices. They're allowed to cook for themselves, study on their own. I mean, it's a very, very, I don't want to say liberal, but it's a very
That's
free life as far as
different
prisons.
than what the Israeli hostages,
Yes.
are being through in the Gaza Strip at this fight.
Yeah.
So
And
he
Yahya
was
Sinwar studies Hebrew in the prison.
tell us, why did he study Hebrew,
He
Mati?
studies Hebrew because he hates the Israelis.
And he wanted to get into the mind
Yeah.
of his enemy in order to understand our tactics. He was reading strategy books
Yeah.
of Israeli wars, of Israeli generals, to understand how the IDF operated in the past and how the IDF is operating now.
Yeah, and it's these kind of anecdotes that I think they really give you an understanding of who these people are. They talk about, the leaders of North Korea. Kim Jong-un, the guy has an obsession with NBA basketball.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, but it almost seems like pointless until you really understand. It gives you color and like a three-dimensional element to the person. Yahya Sinwar, he's not just some like violent radical Muslim who's looking to like kill himself.
Yeah.
He's wise. He's a studious individual. He spent decades studying Hebrew and then reading, just countless amounts of Hebrew language literature.
Yeah.
It's said about him that inside the
yeah.
Gaza Strip, he consumes Hebrew news on a daily basis and always has. Hebrew newspapers, Hebrew articles, analysis of the Hebrew political system.
Yeah, the political situation, the rifts within the Israeli society.
Yeah. And that helps you understand how a man like that reaches his decisions. He's not he is a cold-blooded murderer.
Yeah.
He's not a cold-blooded murderer who hasn't thought about his actions. He's premeditated. He's thought about it for a long time. He has the doctrine behind it. He has a religious explanation and rationalization behind it. Mm-hmm. And he made a decision based on that information.
Yeah.
And I'll jump forward to what we're going to sort of end with, is his decisions to start the October 7th attack have to do with a very wide basis of knowledge.
Yeah.
He's not this guy like, I think I'm going to know. He's like, he has studied, he's educated, he's thought about this long and hard and reached a conclusion.
Yeah. And he believes in his goals, in his methods, and that he can achieve them in time.
Yeah.
And he believes that the only way that the Palestinian people and the Muslim world can move forward is by destroying Israel.
Yeah.
And he thinks that's his goal and his purpose in life. Like, his vision and his strategy is to destroy Israel as part of a bigger Muslim plan to take control of the region, of the world, and spread the Muslim ideology everywhere, basically.
And I think that's something that's sort of repetitive in the story of many great
enemies of Israel.
Many great evil people and many great good people in history.
Also in the Bible times.
Yeah. And it's the people, they have this connection to a bigger story. And Yahya Sinwar, it would be semi-interesting if he just said, well, I'm doing this for my personal gain. I want to be the most famous Muslim in the world. I want to be the most famous, conquered, the one to fight against the Israelis and win. And he says those things, but he's not concerned with his personal fame. Mm-hmm. Well, not for the sake of personal fame. He ties his story and the story of the Palestinian people in Gaza to the story of the Muslim movement around the world.
To the bigger picture.
To the bigger picture, specifically Sunni Islam. Mm-hmm. And he is the ideological student of his spiritual father, his ideological father, who was also a prisoner in Israeli prisons, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin.
Yeah.
And Ahmed Yassin is the spiritual father and founder of the Hamas movement.
Yeah.
And he is a man, and I need to explain this in a way that is clear to a Western audience. These people use similar language to all other radical and non-radical religious movements around the world. They talk about end times. Yeah. They talk about the latter days. They talk about when the prophet or the Messiah comes back. They just use different language.
Yeah,
They talk about bringing back the caliphate, the kingdom of Islam.
Yeah.
They talk about reinstating the lands that were under Islam. They talk about bringing things to the end times when the Mahdi or the Messiah, whatever Sunni or Shia Muslim you are, you believe in some kind of end time story.
And when you do that, when you connect, people to a bigger picture, to a bigger vision, they will do almost everything for you.
Yeah.
And then also the sacrifices that people are willing to make for a bigger picture, for a vision that is so big and larger than life itself, then all the sacrifices of the civilian population, of the individuals, are nothing in terms of that big picture. And that's what they're doing. And that's how he can justify all the civilian casualties within the Palestinian people. And for him, it's a good cause. I mean, so he had thousands of Palestinians die in this war. It's a good death for the big picture, for the end goal, for achieving this new caliphate of Muslims in this region and in the world.
Yeah.
So that's the connection. And I think that's what us in the West, the Western society, we're missing. And I think that's why all these pro-Hamas and pro-Palestinian protests are gaining so much momentum and so much support, because people do not have a bigger reason to live, something bigger than themselves. And if the only goal is just to have fun today...
Can I add one more to your sentence?
Yeah.
To live and to die.
To live and to die, correct.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So if you only live for yourself, it's very small, and life is very meaningless. So I think that, sadly, our enemies have succeeded in giving people a higher purpose. And this is something that the society, the Western society, and us as believers in general need to unite. We need to be part of God's bigger picture in order to also fulfill our lives, to have a meaningful life, happier life, and also to make a difference and think ahead, 20 years ahead. Like, what am I teaching my kids to be in 20 years from now, and not just what am I going to eat today, how much fun I'm going to have on this weekend, and who am I going to elect for president next year.
And that of course, that's the brilliance of good leadership. Good leadership, or effective leadership, maybe that's the right word to use, knows how to set the banner that's ahead of the camp. Where are we going as a people? What are our goals? Who are we as a nation? Who are we as a collective? Virtuous leaders, they do that in a positive sense. We are the people that pursue life. We are the people that pursue success. We are the people who progress. We are the people who show compassion. That's the positive side. That's much of what the Israeli narrative is. The Hamas has done an incredibly effective job of rallying people around the Muslim world and also in the anti-Semitic and the anti-Semitic world around the battle cry of reinstating. And they really connect all these thought processes together. And Sinwar does this brilliantly. Reconnecting the thought of a Muslim kingdom, reconnecting the thought of pushing back what they call the remnant of colonialism, Israel, which is so far
nothing to do
it's
with that.
so far from truth that it's just absurd and humorous. But they say, okay, if you're post-colonial, which many self-titled progressives are, or many people around the world think that they're post-colonial, they'd say, well, Israel's a colony that occupies our countries, so let's rid ourselves of the colonialism. And they do this in many different fronts. We are the oppressed, help us. So he's done this very effective job of shaping a story that works for many people, which is why you see people who wouldn't be able to survive in the same room rallying together, supporting for Hamas. You see pro-LGBTQ liberals around the world violently riding for Hamas, which is the essence of an anti-liberal organization. I mean, it's an organization that murders anyone who believes in those values.
Forget about murders. Women cannot walk in the streets with showing their head. I mean, they have to walk with...
Well, they're not allowed to walk alone.
Or to walk alone at all. So it's like, it's the opposite of liberalism.
So he rallies the ultra-liberal. He rallies the ultra-Islamist. He rallies the extremist Islamists, and even Shia Muslims support their Sunni Muslim agenda.
Which, by the way, after Hamas, according to them, will destroy Israel, they will start to destroy each other. Shia and Sunni always are infighting in wars. Saudi Arabia against Iran. You had that between Iraq against Iran. It's always Shia versus Sunni. Unless you have a common enemy, which is Israel.
Israel and Western values. So you mentioned the vision and the strategy.
Wait, before that, let's talk about, we have also dates. So Yassin, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, he gave a date. He said that according to his calculations, by 2027, Israel will be destroyed. So, I mean, the clock is ticking. We have 2.5 years, according to him.
Well, I've read the Bible. That's not happening. but they're doing everything. They're doing everything they can to promote that agenda, and they're clever about it. They're conniving about it.
So they attack now, so that they give themselves a chance for another redo. Because the October 7th is like is 2 years before.
I think Yahya Sinwar knows, and he says this. You cannot act against Israel, or his power won't be enough to bring down the country of Israel.
Well, he wanted like a joint cooperation.
Yes, but part of what they look at, as we talked about Yahya Sinwar's sort of obsession with Israeli media, they were looking for weakness.
They found it.
And they found it.
Yes.
And I'll remind our viewers that in the 12 or a little more than that months leading up to the October 7th events, Israel experienced the most divisive moment of conflict in our history as a country since 1948 on a political level. Yeah. And we had, never-ending demonstrations
every day,
for
every
and against
Saturday.
the government.
Yes.
It was several years, but in earnest for over a year. And he identified that. And again, Yassin religiously reads the newspapers, religiously follows Israeli websites, religiously follows like the trends of Israeli politics. And he saw that as a moment of weakness in our society. And he used that moment to say, well, maybe this is a moment of sufficient weakness to bring them down or cause enough damage to start toppling over the organization.
Well, it's also, history repeats itself. Like when Israel is divided, that's when we are the weakest. And our enemies can come and take over us. When we are united, we are strong. It's very hard to defeat the IDF. And this is what happened after October 7th. Sadly, we need to remind ourselves with bad times that we need to be united in order to survive in this region.
Yeah.
And Sinwar, so his ultimate goal is the complete liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea.
Which means essentially the genocide of all the Jewish people in this country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he's open about it. And we've talked about this many times before. He's never been shy about saying that out loud. Yasser Arafat before him
was a bit shyer.
Well, he's
also a terrorist.
I'll say in his benefit, I say this cynically, he was at least duplicit in his messaging.
Yes, in English,
at least he lied.
Something one, in Arabic another message.
Yasser Arafat at least bothered to lie. In English, you would say, no, our faces are to peace. We will bring peace. And in Arabic, he'd say, we drive out the Jews and we'll kill all the Jews.
Oh, this is a temporary agreement, and then we continue the war afterwards.
And Yahya Sinwar has never been that way. Yahya Sinwar has been open from day one, all the way till today, about his end goal. His end goal is the destruction of the Jewish state, the destruction of the Jewish people, the destruction of everything that is Western, Judeo-Christian in its values, and the promotion of ultra-religious, extremist, Islamic caliphate or country. That is his agenda.
It is against to any liberal ideologies, any Western ideologies, no freedom of religion, no freedom of worship, no equal rights for men and women. Definitely not talk about, the LG, all the, the gay communities and other minorities around the world that want freedoms. None of that in the future vision of Yahya Sinwar and of the Hamas country that he wants to create here in Israel. So just to be clear about it.
So we've created this backdrop. Sinwar is educated. Sinwar is indoctrinated. Sinwar is a man of the book. He understands Islam and he knows how to talk the language well. He understands Israeli values and politics and history and understands how to engage with that messaging box. And he does so effectively. His press releases, by the way, Hassan Nasrallah is very similar. Maybe we should do a episode.
Another one about him, definitely.
Hassan Nasrallah is the same. He also reads Israeli media, just translated. They care a lot about what we think.
We should be in Israeli prisons for 22 years. We teach him Hebrew along the way.
I think we can skip the prison part. But Yahya Sinwar understands our mindset. And again, remember, this man is a terrorist. He's not a political leader that's planning to win an election.
No.
He wants to scare. He wants to bring fear to our hearts. He wants to bring down our nation. And the way he does that is with terrorism. And terrorism is the use of violence against innocent people, the use of brutality against civilian population. And he's done so effectively and systematically.
And also against his own people.
Yes.
Okay, so let me be clear. There is no Palestinian people. Fatah, which is basically the Palestinian Authority and the body that is representing the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, and also in front of the United Nations, in front of the EU. They are at war with Hamas for many, many years. After the elections happened in the Gaza Strip, I don't know, about more than 10 years ago.
2006.
Fatah were thrown off rooftops of buildings.
Yeah.
And all the officials were either killed or exiled to the areas of Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
So Yahya Sinwar is definitely not friendly to his own people, and he doesn't want to unify the Palestinian cause. He's using force and terror tactics, fear, and other, evil ways in order to gain control.
You raise a very important point, which people need to understand, is that these people, they're evil on multiple levels, and they're dangerous on multiple levels. He's not just scary in the sense of he's a terrorist that fights against Israel. The way he remained in power, the way Hamas remained in power, and we talked about this in a previous episode about the corruption of Hamas, is that they control everything in the Gaza Strip. They control the rights,
food, education.
Yes, the food, the education, the nonprofits that distribute aid. Everything. The border crossings. They're a violent terrorist organization that, first of all, exacts violence and terrorism against its own people, and kills any kind of resistance, any kind of opposition. And by kills, I don't mean in the political sense. I don't mean in the legal sense. Kills and then murder and destroy.
And destroys entire families
and make people disappear sense of it.
Yeah. And more than that, even in areas that the IDF destroyed the military wings and the military battalions of Hamas, Hamas paid young thugs to keep threatening the Palestinians and beat them up with clubs in order for them to get in line, to pay high taxes, to buy food, to take the humanitarian aid from them.
Yeah.
So that's how they operate. That's how they, even operating after the IDF destroyed their military presence in some areas.
Yeah. So let's summarize history and then move on to October 7th. Hamas takes over the Gaza Strip after Israel withdraws. Israel withdraws in 2005 completely from the Gaza Strip, evacuates or removes all the Jewish population. 2006, the Hamas and the current Palestinian Authority, the PLO movement, they go to general elections in both Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip. The Hamas, and still would win today, they win a majority in their house. Hamas wins the elections. Hamas then violently, because of course the PLO doesn't happily sort of relinquish their power, Hamas violently takes over the Gaza Strip. The PLO, which is Yasser Arafat's organization, so to speak, remains inside Judea and Samaria, but not in the Gaza Strip. And then, since 2006, they've been controlling this part of the world, the Gaza Strip. Yahya Sinwar comes back to the stage after he's released from prison. He becomes the general leader, let's call it, of the military movement of Hamas. And he's the one who initiates, plans, and executes the moment of October 7th.
Yes. And he does that by exploiting some vulnerabilities that Israel has. So maybe we can go down and identify these weaknesses that Israel suffered and how Sinwar used these weaknesses in order to successfully carry out one of the largest terrorist attacks in the history of the world.
Yeah. And again, we talk a lot here on the show and in general about the fact that they're at least systematic about what they do, these people.
And they don't lie about it. Yeah, they tell it to your face. We just choose not to believe them.
They really put their all into these attempts. He is a leader that has taken his entire people and led them under one flag and to one end. And that end is violence, death, destruction. And they've done so systematically. They've built tunnels with all the money they received. They've bought weapons with all the money they had. They've trained their people in tunneling and acts of terrorism and violence.
Summer camps, summer camps for kids.
Exactly, instead of teaching them computer programming or anything else. And that's the people, that's the culture, that's the economy that Yahya Sinwar brings to the October 7th events. And it's important to understand because it doesn't happen out of the blue. He's been indoctrinating, and they have been indoctrinating for generations. They've been training for over a decade. They've been financing for over a decade. Then they arrive to October 7th.
And that's why also so many of the people that actually crossed the border into Israel and committed, many atrocities against the Israelis are not Hamas militants. They were just civilians, but they were so indoctrinated and wanted to be part of this huge vision and huge goal of destroying the Jewish state and destroying Israel and taking control of all of Palestine from the river to the sea.
So then the Hamas forces of Yahya Sinwar, who've been fighting these lower scale wars for many, many years with Israel. It almost became an annual event where they'd fire some rockets and try to sort of like attack the fence and send teenagers and civilians to sort of try to like swarm the fence and stuff like that. They orchestrate a much larger scale and much more violent attack, which is a first of in their history.
It was coordinated also on multiple locations throughout the fence with very good intelligence. I mean, we've been seeing maps that shows the location of IDF bases with arrows, where this unit should attack and where the other unit should attack, and where are the areas that are most, keen and vulnerable, and where are the Israeli defenses are located. So they were planning this for a very long time.
Yes. And they attack on October 7th. It's hard to give an exact number, but it's close to 1,500 original terrorists that attack the fence, and over 3,000, which probably is the numbers,
the civilians,
including like the second wave of, let's call it more ad hoc terrorists, people that sort of like joined in, whether they're Hamas or non-Hamas combatives, who swarm the Israeli fences. On October 7th, they use explosive charges and shape charges and tractors that have been left there in a very smart way. They knock out Israeli intelligence and electricity and communication and observation balloons and. I mean, it's,
and they attack the command centers of the south, so that it would be very hard for the IDF to respond.
And he there's no way to frame this differently. He strikes the most successful terrorist attack against history ever. I mean, the attack of October 7th is the most deadly, the most effective, the scariest, the most well-planned terrorist attack ever carried out against Israel. And honestly, I can't think of any other case in modern history. And he does so. It humiliates Israel. It catches us completely unprepared. It takes us days to gain back the full control of
to clear Israel from terrorists that were just roaming the streets.
It took us actually several weeks in certain areas to fully clear out Israel from terrorists that had infiltrated the country. And Yahya Sinwar does this with the knowledge that it will cause a huge retaliation from the Israeli army. He does this expecting the bloodshed of countless Israeli citizens, which is what happened. And he does this with also one big other expectation, that other entities, Hezbollah namely, and the Iranians would join in on that attack.
And Judea and Samaria.
Yes. Yeah. And they don't.
Yes. Thank God they didn't.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But his expectation, he said this, and they have said this, he expected on October 7th, he expected Hezbollah to join in on the attack.
For sure.
And he expected the Hamas, Islamic Jihad, other terrorist organizations, and just terrorist clans within Judea and Samaria to chime in, so to speak, into the terrorist attack against Israel and join in on the attack. And thank God they didn't.
Yes, definitely. No, I've just been talking to like security experts last week, and they said that if Hezbollah would have joined the attack on the same day, on the 7th of October, they would reach Haifa.
Yes.
The Israeli city. So basically, half of Israel would be swarmed with terrorists from the northern border and from the Gaza Strip area. So if that would have happened, that would have been a totally different ballgame. And that's a topic for another podcast to understand why. What if? Why didn't they join? What did they gain by not joining? And
but what he did know, and I said this previously, he knew Israel would retaliate. And he knew he would have no choice, and he was banking on it. He expected Israel to invade Gaza.
But he expected us to invade immediately, like the day after. And he was planning that we will send in our ground invasion immediately after the 7th of October, which we didn't do. We waited a few weeks, and basically we launched airstrikes, we gathered intelligence, we regrouped, we trained our reserve units, and then we conducted our counter-offensive.
And since that attack began, Israel has taken over much of the Gaza Strip. We've both isolated them on their border crossing, specifically into Sinai, but also taken over much of the strongholds of Hamas, not all, but much of the strongholds of Hamas. And it has cost Hamas dearly. It's cost them the lives of thousands of their combatives.
They lost all their battalions almost, except for one in Rafah that is still semi-operational.
Much of their structure has been sort of torn apart as far as like a military control, and yet they continue to fight.
Because the ideology is still strong. Because despite the destruction of their military capabilities, each militant, each terrorist that belongs to Hamas was raised with the ideology of murdering Israelis, killing IDF soldiers. So even if you have one terrorist in a little hole in the ground with an RPG rocket, he will still use that rocket and risk his life because he believes he will gain something in the afterlife. And he's part of a bigger game. He has hope only in that direction. There is no other hope according to their beliefs. And that's what Yahya Sinwar successfully, indoctrinated into the minds of all these young Palestinians for a decade.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that the solution to this war and to the Gaza Strip is very hard to pinpoint and to identify, because even if you put another government, like a peaceful government, how can you re-educate a whole generation that's all they've been taught, all that they think about? The best of the best is to die fighting Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a generation to change that mindset. Another terrible element of the evil of Yahya Sinwar and the Hamas movement is their choice of sacrificing their own people. And they've done so systematically. They intentionally, and have done so for many, many years, they put their civilians, and specifically women and children, in the line of fire.
Intentionally. And I can tell you also why, firsthand. I mean, they place all their underground tunnels and the headquarters underneath schools in the Gaza Strip.
Schools and hospitals.
Schools, hospitals, mosques.
Yeah, and UN facilities.
Yeah. Which, what all these facilities have in common?
Women and children.
And also, according to international law, armies are not allowed to attack these facilities because of women, children, civilian locations, and infrastructure that is very important for the civilian population.
Yeah, and that's where they really become evil, is that they take joy at their civilians being killed. For them, that's a win, and it's a very roundabout and bizarre way to look at it. But they look at the international pressure that's coming to Israel because of the death of civilians.
Yes.
They look at that as a win.
Yeah.
And it's morally corrupt to say that. They think of the death of their own civilians as a win. And they're happy for them to die because of that. Because in their mind, and I know this sounds like almost childlike in its description, it brings us down to their level, to the level of violence against population, to the level of having our hands covered in blood. And they forced us into this battle, knowing full well that this is what would happen.
And sadly, they've succeeded. Yeah. The picture now, in the eyes of the world, is that Israel are the bad guys, and not Hamas, this terrorist organization that started this evil war and that have been indoctrinating and sending their kids to terror camps in Iran for decades.
Yeah.
So it's just unimaginable to see how the world can easily be manipulated by this mastermind, Yahya Sinwar.
Yeah. And then when you understand that element, the element of blood and sacrificing civilian population, the whole hostage situation starts making sense, in the sense that Hamas has deliberately sort of dragged their feet with the negotiations. They've intentionally sort of blown up the negotiations.
Always.
Time and time again.
Yeah, we agreed, but not to this agreement, but to a better agreement for us, that you all leave us alone, give us money to rebuild, and we attack you again in 10 years.
I love that you give like Hamas a Hebrew accent.
Not good with accents. I have one accent for all everybody.
We can practice later on. But, I mean, the interesting point here is Hamas intentionally drags their feet. Hamas intentionally blows up every round of the negotiations. Yeah. And there have been intercepts of conversations between Yahya Sinwar and Hamas leadership outside of the Gaza Strip recently that show that they know this is going to happen, because in their mind, time is playing to their benefit.
They know that we cannot keep fighting because the international community will not let us keep fighting this war forever.
Yeah.
Because of the high numbers of civilian casualties, because of the money that is invested in this war, because we, unlike Iran and other countries that will put all of their money in terrorism, Israel, the United States, we want, a better economic future for everybody.
Yeah.
And wars cost money.
Yeah. So they drag their feet. And as far as he's concerned, this war can go on as long as it needs to. He has hostages. He's planning to release them in the last possible moment. And it doesn't matter to him. I'd say it's almost an inverse incentive. As far as he's concerned, the more civilians die in the process, the better. The better for him, because Israel is tarnished even more on the international stage, and he's happy with that.
No, and for him, civilian population is something that you can regrow and just create more. And that's what is happening. And so he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the hostages, and he sees what it does and how it tears Israel apart. The whole hostage situation. Let's agree to any kind of deal. Doesn't matter what, just to release our hostages. He's playing on the fact that we care and love our sons and daughters that are being kept by Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
He plays on that. And sadly, because of the international community's inability to understand who they're dealing with and the mind and the ideology behind Hamas, behind Sinwar, he's winning this part of this war.
No, I'd say on a terrorism level, as far as like the efficacy of this attack, it's been a huge win for Hamas and Islam.
Yeah.
Go back a year. We're talking, Middle East was deep in conversations about the Abraham Accords, phase 3 at that point.
Yeah.
Here the Saudis are coming to the table. Here, this other country. We already had the Emirates, we had the Kuwaitis.
Yeah, Israelis flying to UAE, they fly here, business cooperation.
And then like on the Palestinian front, both the Americans and the Israelis and other Arab countries essentially say publicly, and we lost the shame over the topic, like, no, the Palestinians have become a non-issue. We no longer are interested in talking about the problem of the Palestinians.
Yeah, it's impossible to solve this problem. Let's just, solve other problems.
Yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it, and let's keep going.
Yeah.
And they've brought back to the front and center of the world, let's call it discourse, the topic of the Palestinian conflict. And
there are more conflicts in the world, Mati. You have conflicts in Africa.
Yeah.
You have tribes. You have atrocities happening in China. You have acts of, hunger, crises, either with weather situations all over the world. But people only focus about the Palestinian issue now and about the Gaza Strip. And it became the most important crisis in this world.
Yeah, because Sinwar, remember something that we forgot for a while, is the fact that this is not just a political and military war. It's a war over public opinions. It's a war over belief systems. Yeah. It's a war about narratives on a national level. And those who hate Israel align on multiple levels. It's Shia Islam. It's Sunni Islam. It's anti-Semitics hiding under the guise of we're liberal, hiding under the guise of we're too progressive, we're post-national. It's all these different guises that people have been hiding behind, all that are the same. They're anti-Semitic because they were brought up that way, or it's ingrained in their culture. They're anti-Semitic because they're jealous of what God's done in this country. And then
they see, because again, if you believe in what God is doing in Israel, in the faithfulness of God to Israel, then you have to believe that God exists. And if you believe that God exists and you admit it, then you need to look at yourself and say, am I following God or not? And that breeds shame and something that they do not want to admit, so they rather go and support the evil side.
Yes, which they have.
Which they're doing.
Which they have. And it's been a powerful moment worldwide of a re-emergence of anti-Semitic sentiment, of open hatred towards Jews and Israel, but also of support to the country of Israel. From Christians around the world, from the Jewish community around the world, from Muslims around the world who say this is not our way, we choose peace. So it's been a moment of division, but the division also brings to the table a discussion over good and evil. And I think when you look at leaders like Sinwar, it reminds you of how powerful leadership is in a biblical sense. And biblical, is the Bible, and let's call it the ancient history talks about people groups as a collective, not as individuals. And we think today about what can my leader bring to me personally, to Mati's life, to Yair's life. No, leaders shape the future of their nation for better and for worse. Yahya Sinwar and the likes of him have brought evil on a generational level. They've brought a curse from generation to generation to the people,
yes, definitely.
a curse of destruction and death, financial failure, lack of education, lack of opportunity, just on every single level, death and destruction to their people. And he is an example of the evil biblical leader. And we look at the opponents of that, and we look at Israel that's always been an anomaly in financial success, an anomaly in education, an anomaly in startups.
Water in the desert.
On many fronts.
Agricultural in areas that nobody grew anything on for decades.
And our leaders are far from being only virtuous.
Definitely.
They cannot go without criticism. And yet when you see evil and what it breeds, it is so clear that it is evil.
Yeah.
It is so clear. You look at the images of Gaza. If you're blind, you'll say, "Oh, Israel did that." And if your eyes are open, you'll say, "No, clearly, this is the work of Hamas. This is the work of radical Islam. This is what it looks like. It looks like the death of the innocent. It looks like children that don't go to school. It looks like kids that don't have food. It looks like economies that collapse." That's what it looks like.
Just look at at his face, Yahya Sinwar. You cannot say that he's a good guy. He looks like the most evil person alive.
No, he seems like a friendly chap.
Yeah, right. So it's just very hard to hide it. And how can you think that he is bringing peace and that Israel is here to bring this war to the region?
Yeah, then let's bring this into the personal aspect. Yahya Sinwar, like many people, is or all people, I should say, is mortal.
Yeah.
The difference is Yahya Sinwar does not fear death, and he's been very open about that.
Yeah.
He is a man who's
he knows that he will die.
He's not a salesperson in the sense that he's selling something to his people that he doesn't believe in. He personally is, and he expressed this publicly. He understands that the death of his own children was something that was good for the cause. And he says about himself, "One day I will be killed, and I am okay." And I don't want to say, I don't think he doesn't fear death, but he understands that he's willing to sacrifice his life for the goal that he promotes. Mm-hmm. And that's something scary.
That's super scary, yeah, because this is the situation also with many of the Hamas terrorists now in the Gaza Strip, because as the IDF is tightening the noose around the communities and the areas of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, the terrorists become more and more desperate.
Yeah.
And when you're more desperate, you're more dangerous.
Yeah.
So this is the situation, by the way, for our soldiers that are fighting now in the Gaza Strip, in Rafah, in other areas, that they need to deal with desperate terrorists that see the end coming closer every day.
Yeah. And I mean, and that if you look at the history of mankind, the worst types of evil come when people radicalize and put a faith system on evil behavior. Mm-hmm. Because if you're evil alone in a society, people will point it out as evil. But if you're able to corrupt the morality of a society, to change the way they look at the world, to the point where they look at black and they say it's white, and it's evil and they say it's good, which is what Hamas has done with the people of Gaza, which is what radical Islam has done to Muslims around the world.
Definitely.
They're able to corrupt it to the degree where there is no moral boundary anymore. And that's what Yahya Sinwar has brought to the people of Gaza. He's brought a life that has no moral boundaries. There is no good anymore. There's no bad anymore. Everything goes.
Everything goes for the bigger picture, for this plan, for destroying Israel, for creating a Palestinian state from the river to the sea. That's everything that they want to achieve, and you can do whatever you want in order to reach that goal. And something that is very important is that if we let Hamas go now, if the IDF withdraws from the Gaza Strip, Hamas will resume 10 times stronger, super fast.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't believe how fast, because we think that we destroyed all these terrorists, but they can train them, they can gain weapons again, they can reform their political support all around the world, and they will come 10 times stronger if the IDF will not defeat Hamas completely in the Gaza Strip, and if the IDF will not have a plan for the day after.
Yes.
We need, because a power vacuum will always be filled with someone. And sadly, in the Middle East, it will be someone strong and vicious and more evil than the one before, unless you put somebody there that you can control and that you can support in raising a better future for the Palestinians.
Yeah. So to wrap up, today was, as far as I'm concerned, the first of many deep digs into the profile of the people that lead the world around us. And we told the story of Yahya Sinwar and how this man is a unique example of both knowledge, experience, and radical worldviews that have brought an evil that has been unseen in this world in a very, very long time. And it tells a story that is indicative and relevant for everyone around us. A story where evil does exist, where good and bad are clear, separate options, and where the results of evil leadership and evil governance and evil faith brings destruction to a people. And I think that's a very powerful note to end on understanding that there is a good and bad in this world.
Definitely.
And there is importance to understanding the story in depth.
And there's importance to deciding on which side are you on.
Yes.
Are you on the good side? Are you on the bad side? If you watch this podcast and you're interesting and you think that we make sense of what we say, that Hamas is evil, don't be silent. Please help us and share these videos with anyone who seeks to know the truth of really what is happening. Okay, you can help us by subscribing to this YouTube channel and by sharing us on social media, because we need the truth to come out of Israel and reach the ends of the world. And Mati, I think that sadly, as we say, that Hamas is winning this battle for the media, and that is not because people are bad and evil. It's just because I think that the good people are not joining in the fight. They're just quiet and bystanders.
Yeah.
And the evil people or the people that support Hamas are very vocal on all the platforms. So we need to kind of rally up together.
Yeah, I think that's a call to battle for everyone who's watching this content. And I'll say this to our viewers: people don't understand that the majority of the people in the world live in countries that are non-democracies, non-lovers of human rights and freedom.
Yeah.
And if you care about the good of the world, and if you care about promoting the messages that we create, messages that are founded in the truth and what's good in this world, make sure you press the subscription button and also the little bell next to it so you never miss another episode of the podcast or any of the excellent content that Yair creates on a daily basis, both of us on a daily basis. So make sure you subscribe and share this content.
And if you'd like to help us create more content like this one or other contents, I mean, we have plans to go outside to Judea and Samaria, to the border with Lebanon and other places in this region and outside of Israel as well. So if you want to see more content, please consider making a financial donation that will go to creating additional videos from Israel by clicking the donate button on YouTube or by going to our website at www.tbn.org/Israel.
You know, Yair, this isn't a happy topic or a light topic, but I feel like getting the opportunity to really go deep into the mind of a supervillain like Yahya Sinwar really helps understand the world we live in. It helps understand that there's a difference between good and evil, but also that there is a way to tackle it. I mean, he's not some monster that is completely misunderstood. There's a method to the madness of the man and a method to the madness of the organization that he leads.
Yeah, and more than that, I mean, it's important for people to understand who Israel is fighting. Because this mastermind doesn't want just Israel. It wants to spread the ideology of death to the Middle East, to the European nations, to the United States. And this is not a good person that wants peace and that is open for solidarity, economic cooperation. So people should know that. And that's why they should support Israel in this war and in this battle.
Yeah, I think that's enough for today.
Definitely.
It was a really good conversation to go deep into the mind of Yahya Sinwar, and I hope you have another opportunity to do something similar like that. And to everyone who's stuck around up till now, you deserve bonus points. Thank you. That's everything for this week's version of the TBN Israel podcast. Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online